Hello and welcome back. In the previous video lesson, we discussed the prospects of a trade war. So in this video, then I will discuss the economic sanctions as one means of real warfare. So of course, the economic sanctions have a long history. One notable example is the so-called Continental system established by Napoleon in 1806 to stop the trade between the UK and European nations. So this would be an example of embargo type of sanction. Of course, during that time, Britain had its colonies overseas, so this was not very effective and it probably hurt the European countries even more than the UK. But anyway, this just example illustrates that sanctions such as embargoes have been also used as a weapon of war. So according to the global sanctions database, there have been more than 1,300 sanctions after the 1950s, or after the Second World War. And it's of course not always very clear that what is this kind of a difference between a sanction versus trade barrier. But typically sanctions have then specific objectives to somehow hurting this target country in order to change the policy or influence the policy, perhaps destabilize the hostile regime, resolve territorial conflicts or fight terrorism, prevent or end war. Might have also more noble objectives such as restoring and promoting human rights or democracy. So in any way, this sanctions typically have some kind of deliberate impact to this country that the sanctions are against. So now, of course, there has been a lot of discussion about sanctions on Russia. It already started when Russia annexed Crimea and the eastern parts of Ukraine in 2014. But especially when then there was this full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine in 2022, then the European Union and other Western countries have then started to impose more severe sanctions. And here is one example of the EU sanctions in the form of a quota on Russian steel products. So these kind of trade barriers like quotas and tariffs can be also used to implement sanctions to a country. And this example of the sanction of steel products, it starts first as a quota that limits to that decreases the imports of steel products from Russia to EU, and then after this specific period of approximately 2 years, then it continues as a full ban. So this example also illustrates that when imposing some economic sanctions, then policymakers tend to prefer this kind of so-called command and control type instruments like quotas or bans or embargoes, and there would be, of course, more like monetary economic type instruments like tariffs, but for some reason the policymakers do not always prefer this kind of economic more economic type like tariffs when imposing sanctions. I come back to this point shortly. But of course, typically when some country or consortium of countries imposes some sanctions, then this another country responds. So of course also Russia then had its counter sanctions. and one group of commodities where Russia could hurt the other countries, the Western countries, was this quotas on fertilizer exports. So Russia had a combination of quotas and tariffs, and also its ally Belarus was joining these counter sanctions. So this figure illustrates the development or share of global potassic exports. So potassium is one of the important ingredient for fertilizers. So the first donut is from the year 2021, before the sanctions, and then 2022, 2023 are after the Russia's counter sanctions were taking place. So we see that these global potassic exports from Russia and Belarus, they decreased quite notably from 2021 to 2022. To some extent, Canada, which is the largest exporter of potassium, could increase its production and increase its share of exports, and then the rest of the world also increased its share after the Russia and Belarus decreased their exports. So of course this kind of decrease in Russian exports and Belarus exports then had an immediate effect of increasing the prices of fertilizers, and which also then affects the food prices, and it also contributed to the rising inflation in Europe, and also but also in the third world countries. So if you look at also below these donuts, we see the total exports of potassium. So there was quite a substantial drop from 33 million to only 28 million in 2022. But then by 2023, other countries could increase their production and exports, so that by 2023 the global exports had already returned almost to the same level as in 2021, because then other countries could step up, and if in effect then this impact of this Russian counter sanctions was relatively temporary, and in effect then Russia was effectively, and especially Belarus, was losing a lot of its markets here. So this also illustrates that sanctions can have sanctions can also hurt the country that is issuing them, because then other countries can respond to it. So, of course, very important source of the Russian export revenues is from oil and natural gas, and not surprisingly, then the EU and other Western countries, the G7 group, agreed to sanctions on oil. And the oil, of course, is somewhat difficult, and so is also the natural gas, because many countries, including European countries, were rather dependent on the Russian energy prior to the 2022 invasion. So then the policymakers need to balance with this getting access to the energy, but also somehow trying to cut down the Russia's exports revenues and its ability to finance its war on Ukraine. So the agreement then of the G7 countries was to impose a price cap. So that's a somewhat unorthodox trade barrier, but this is what the politicians could agree upon. So they imposed a price cap of $60 for the Russian oil, and this price cap applies to any purchase of crude oil exported by sea after December 5th, 2022, and provided that this purchase involves maritime, financial, or other services from any entity based in the coalition's member jurisdiction. So effectively, this coalition could impose this price cap only to such kind of exports that take place on vessels that have been insured or financed or are carried by these vessels of these sanctioning countries. So this is perhaps somewhat a complicated arrangement, and it had also some negative side effects that I will discuss shortly. But of course, many economists prior to these sanctions would rather propose, for example, imposing some high tariff on Russian oil and Russian natural gas, so allow imports of Russian oil and Russian gas to Europe, for example, but impose a tariff that would extract this kind of a large part of the Russia's export revenues. So in many ways, a tariff could have been a better instrument to impose sanctions on Russian oil. However, then the G7 governments agreed upon this kind of price cap. And first of all, I want to say that the price cap has not been very effective. So this diagram on this slide indicates, so there is this flat broken line indicates this price cap of 60 euros, $60 per barrel. And we see that initially when these sanctions were imposed, then indeed the Russian crude oil, so the red curve indicates the Russian crude oil price, and the black one, I believe, is some kind of Brent oil or some kind of other quality of oil. So initially the Russian oil prices decreased even below this price cap of 60. But then it took maybe 1 year, about one year or so. So it was relatively effective. But after then, in the autumn of 2023, the prices of Russian oil started to increase and far exceed this price cap. So Russia could effectively avoid this sanction. And the way that Russia avoided these sanctions was to establish quickly so-called shadow fleet of vessels. And according to this EU document, Russia's shadow fleet vessels use insurance from obscure or offshore producers that are not part of this coalition that imposed sanctions. And the lack of insurances and also the poor quality of this shadow fleet vessels also increases safety risks and also particularly environmental risks of oil spills. And very often also this ownership and management of these vessels has been hidden by complicated arrangements. So it's very difficult to also find the actual owners of this shadow fleet vessels. But this diagram on the figure also illustrates that how this Russia's crude oil shipments by the shadow fleet have increased a lot since spring of 2022. So effectively, the shadow fleet allows Russia to avoid this kind of sanctions, and particularly these exports have increased in the Baltic Sea, which is indicated by the orange color, and also the Pacific, which is the bottom blue, but also in the Black Sea and Arctic Ocean. And in fact, also these environmental risks already have realized. So this is the news item from the Guardian newspaper. So recently, in 15th of December, 2 tankers that belong to this Russia's shadow fleet were hit by a storm in the Kerch Strait in the Black Sea, and one of the vessels sank and another ran aground. So there was a major oil spill to the Black Sea, and here is a photo also how volunteers are trying to clean a beach near Anapa in Russia after this oil spill. So this is of course a major environmental disaster that was caused by this kind of relatively poor quality shadow fleet, which is very unfortunate. But then not only this shadow fleet has environmental consequences, there's also security concerns. So recently here in Finland, there was a major news that this one vessel belonging to the Russia's shadow fleet named Eagle S was driving with this anchor more than 100 kilometers in the Gulf of Finland, and it was breaking telecommunication cables and electricity cable between Finland and Estonia. So the Finnish border guard managed to identify this vessel and detained it. And so currently it is then the vessel and the crew is detained in Finland and waiting they collect evidence to sue the company or the crew members in the court. So this also, the shadow fleet also creates a lot of security issues as well, besides the environmental risks that already realized in the Black Sea. So these examples perhaps also illustrate that economic sanctions, if they are somewhat poorly designed, they can also have very negative consequences. And I still do believe that, for example, a tariff on Russian oil and gas would have been a more effective policy measure to impose sanctions on Russia. So in the next video lesson, I will continue on the environmental theme, and I will discuss the new carbon border adjustment mechanism introduced by the EU. See you then.